Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alistair Wheats. I'm the head of product strategy here at Analytica. We're an influencer marketing platform and an insights analyst. So today we're going to be looking at the topic of how to choose influencers based upon your business values. And I'm delighted to be joined by three excellent speakers. We have with us Konstanze Alex, and Mark Schaefer and Tim McLoughlin. I'll be introducing them shortly, but just to quickly talk about the theme of today's session, we're going to be looking at the topic of influencer marketing and how brands are working with influencers to create marketing partnerships based on mutual value exchanges to more effectively communicate with and influence their target audiences. So these partnerships include activities such as speaking at events, co-creating content, and networking with senior executives. It's therefore imperative that influencers, brands partner with can be trusted and that they share the same brand values, so their voices aligned to the brand's messaging and that they are a good fit. So that's our synopsis for today. We'll be talking about this both from people who are working in brands, but also Mark, who's joining us as an influencer who works with brands. Important if anyone joining, if you're joining and you've got a very limited narrow view of influencer marketing being just about people promoting stuff on Instagram, for holidays or for clothes, then yeah, that is part of what influencer marketing is about. But I'm really hoping that if you've got a very narrow view of influencer marketing, this talk will give you a much broader view of lots of different ways in which influencers can work with brands. Influencers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and lots of different things that are going to be appealing from a brand's point of view to work with them. Brands also have lots of different objectives and reasons why they're going to want to work with brands, and also different objectives, campaigns, and internal stakeholders are going to have different things they want to get out of it. So it's really important when brands are thinking about working with influencers that they pick the right people to work with. And a key part of that is to get a good fit in terms of brand values. So just to introduce our three speakers, so we have got Konstanze Alex, PhD, joining us from Dell. Also, do you prefer Konstanze or Connie? Or is it just Connie for friends? Right. Connie, let's stick with Connie then. Make sure I pronounce it right as well. And so Connie's the influencer marketing lead at Dell, and her focus is on driving a robust global strategy for influencer content co-creation that positively impacts Dell's share of voice. Now, Connie's a great first person to work with because she's able to do influencer work both in the B2B and the B2C world, which is kind of unusual. And also, Connie's an adjunct professor in technical communications at Texas Technical University. So, as if she's not busy enough already with her day job. And we've also got, so we're delighted to have Mark Schaefer joining us. Mark is a globally recognized blogger, speaker, marketing consultant, author, and executive branding coach. He teaches graduate marketing classes at Rutgers University and has written 6 best-selling books. Hopefully soon to become 7, right, Mark? Next year.
Hope so.
Yeah. And Tim McLaughlin's also joining us. Actually, Tim's just running a little bit late, so he'll be with us shortly. But Tim is the global social media head for Hotels.com, encompassing all brand social media marketing across the world. Tim manages a team across 4 locations in North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And he's won awards for his work and talks about advertising at conferences around the world. So we've got 3 very knowledgeable speakers, all with a different perspective. So we're really excited to hear what they have to say. Just to kick off the conversation, we hear a lot in the press sometimes about influence marketing gone wrong. And there's often high-profile examples of famous people doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing online. But I'd love to hear from you guys some examples of where you think a brand influencer collaboration has worked well, particularly in terms of the value alignment between the brand and the influencer, and why do you think it was a good alignment? So yeah, perhaps feel free to share something from your own personal experience or a third-party partnership that you've observed. So Mark, can you kick us off with that one, please?
Sure. Well, it's fun for me to be on the webinar with Connie, because we've worked together for years, and I'm sure she'll talk about some of our experiences together at Dell. But I think a good example for me is some work that I did with IBM. And I think there's some good lessons behind it as well. So I was invited to attend some workshops and talks around IBM Watson. And so this is something I was vitally interested in. I like writing about these things. And I had access to some key executives, actually some of the developers. And I got to ask them about how Watson is going to fit into the world, how artificial intelligence is going to be integrated with marketing. And the things I learned in those sessions, I was able to then eventually work into blog posts, into my talks, even into some of my classes, and a mention in a book that I wrote. And I think a key idea here is that IBM didn't pay me to write those blog posts. They didn't pay me to talk about them in my classes or my talks. The thing that really drives content to move with a lot of these influencers is access to something that's different, something that's unique. One of the things that drives influencers is they want to show that they're on top of their market. They want to be seen as experts. They want to be seen as relevant. And the power of influence marketing really is moving that content, is moving those ideas, which brings up a second important point, and that is measurement. So one of the issues with measurement, and one of the controversies with measurement, is that it can be difficult with influencers. So if you think about the power of including a mention of IBM and Watson in one of my speeches, or in a mention in a book or something like that, I mean, that's really incredible value. What's the ROI of that? You know, it's really, really difficult. You have to open your mind to qualitative measures as well as quantitative measures. And I think smart leaders will understand that and embrace that they'll understand, well, you know, that's pretty valuable. That's pretty interesting that Mark Schaefer talked about us in a speech, and Mark Schaefer mentioned us in a book. And that's not necessarily something that will show up in a dashboard. You got to do a little bit of work to actually figure out what's going on with influencers. And I'm not saying at all that we should abandon quantitative measures like some of the things you can find through Analytica, mentions, and so forth. But I want to challenge people to expand their mind around the value coming from qualitative measures that are more difficult to pin down. So that's an example for me of how it really worked in a great way. It was, you know, I wasn't being sold on anything, and I wasn't selling anything. I was provided access to something interesting, and I was creating content based on something that I authentically believed in. I wasn't being asked to sell. I wasn't being asked to, you know, pitch a product. I had no pressure whatsoever. The relationship grew organically and became a trusted relationship that created a mutual value exchange. That's, I think, a key idea for influence today.
Does a lot of the way people think about measurement ultimately tie back to what they had in mind when they were actually choosing who to work with? Because, I mean, if people have got the mindset, I need to find, you know, someone who's got a trusted personal brand, someone who's seen as authentic. If people have got those kind of qualitative criteria at the beginning in the selection, is that going to maybe help just with the right mindset when it comes to evaluation?
Well, I think so. I mean, to work with influencers takes a rather radical mindset shift and really embracing the chaos of what marketing is today. A lot of businesses still have this mindset that they control the sales funnel. They control the customer journey. And that's simply not true. The customers control the journey. And the customers have the opportunity to get information in thousands of places, maybe millions of places. And every customer journey can be different. The customer journey is a tangled mess today. So any idea of controlling that journey has to be abandoned. And the best we can hope for is to find ways to share our stories, to create value for customers in the ways that they want to get it. Where do they want to get it? They want to get it from their friends. And believe me, influencers are viewed as friends. I mean, there are people who, I've got thousands of followers on my blog and my podcast and my books. And I mean, there are people that I've never met, I've never heard of before, that feel they have a true, deep, meaningful connection with me, an emotional connection with me through my content. And they trust what I say. And that really has an impact on our world today. And so really embracing that idea that we're not really in control anymore. and we can't really measure these things the way we used to measure those things. That has to start at the top. Yeah. That has to come from leadership. And the leaders of the company have to understand what's going on and really reward that mindset change in their company.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. Now, Connie, I know you've been doing influencer marketing at Dell for a while now, so hopefully some of these things have started to kind of get into the mindset of some of the senior leadership there. Can you maybe share some examples of where you've seen brand partnerships work with influencers?
Yeah, Alistair, and thank you, Mark, because I agree with what you said. Setting a little bit of context for what we're doing at Dell is, yes, we have been at this for several years. And while influencer marketing, influencer relations is still a new-ish field, I think we have made a ton of progress. And to set a little bit of context around your topic before I go into the example, around the business values aligning with those experts that I'm working with. I like that better as influencer, the word, because it's overused and sometimes misused. You have to go back to your business value. And for us, if we look at the very, very top, that is developing. I'm in the IT industry, so that's a very important point. I work with enterprise influencers, so much, much more with the business in the business-to-business space than anything else. So when I look at our purpose at Dell to develop technology to enable human progress, there's a ton of stuff packed in here. A word that jumps out, of course, is technology. That's a given, but the human part. And Mark alluded to that as already, referring to his followers as friends. But the same can be said when you develop relationships with influencers or experts, industry experts with great influence to their audience. You develop a human relationship. We are in the people business, and it is not a business where we could just, I could hire Mark into my marketing department and say, now do what you do for us. No, that would absolutely not work. So these have to be authentic, great relationships. And I want to give, without going too long here, but happy to answer any questions, give a couple of examples. A couple of years ago, we started building a new division at Dell. That was the IoT division. We didn't have one before. The industrial Internet of Things was making it big time, so we also started really looking much closer in it. In fact, that was in 2015. So we started looking, how can we work with somebody to help us? And it was an easier quest than we thought because we needed a very specific person that was an expert, not only in the new shiny IoT that we all associate, the sensors and making the connections and everything, but we needed also somebody that had a foot in the old operations technology. So what we did, we started developing a relationship with somebody that, evolved over several months. And it started really, let's get to know each other, let's see if we line on the content that each of us need. Are we giving you, the influencer, the information needed? So let's develop this relationship. And then where it really started to work wonderfully was at the end of a 9-10 month relationship building process. And that is short, I want to say, as Mark can attest to. That's at that point we were trusted partners, Dell and the influencer, and we organized a think tank at a large trade show that was our first actually presence at a manufacturing trade show. We were there with IoT solutions. But what was missing yet in the industry was really the collaboration between partners, and mind you, that's 2.5 years ago now, so much has changed. So what we leveraged the influencer for, and I again think was a perfect example of how it can work really well, is helping him help us bridge the gap between IT and OT, vernacular, so speaking the same language. That's where his expertise came in. Now, why is he an influencer? Because he has influence in both camps. In the target audience that we are looking at, those IT decision makers and those OT decision makers that we were targeting with our solutions. And this person was able to help us bridge the gap and talk about it. Of course, we were very interested in that he writes about this, and he did. So, and ultimately that led to him really also being in front of customers. Not as a hired person, but as somebody who profoundly understood what Dell is doing in IoT and the bridges we're trying to build. So that's one example, and you can see that this is not something that can be developed overnight. I would be amiss if I didn't mention the work that Dell is doing with Mark, and he alluded to that at the very beginning. We have worked together, I want to say, for 5 or 6 years, so that is really where an influencer relationship turns into a strategic partnership, and that's where we are with Mark. And we developed together everything from ideation to execution, a brand-level podcast, where we want to, and I'm going back to our primary business goal, to develop technology to enable human progress. Always keeping that in mind. Of course, there's many, many business goals below that, but for the purposes here, I think it's important to keep that in mind. So we did that at around the same time that we underwent a large technology merger, and people needed, our audience and customers needed to understand, what is this new company like? What do they stand for? And who are they? So we became Dell Technologies. It was a brand logo in the beginning. So now let's put some human background behind this. Let's tell our audience what we do. So we brainstormed and really brought Mark's digital storytelling abilities and his creativity to our business value, and putting these two things together in a brand level podcast that not only shines a light on the technologies that we are developing and the vision that we have as Dell, but also on the human technology visionaries that we have as guests on the show, that is co-hosted by Mark and Douglas Carr, and to bring out these stories. The value really lies in that we are able to develop a narrative the way we want it told, through the eyes of somebody coming in from the outside and looking in. We're not telling our own story. We can do that all day long. But this is the value that comes in. And I think the value for Mark and Doug, and Mark jump in at any time, is really getting to see how the soup is made on the inside at Dell, how we are working with customers, how we're working with technology, and then really have this background to develop a fantastic podcast and basically also innovating constantly as we go on. Then I want to bring up one third example, and underlining at this point that an influencer is not an influencer. Alice said that in the beginning, but if I work with an influencer, a subject matter expert who has lots of influence and trust with his audience, it is very important to me, what are our goals? Are we trying to amplify and promote something at the thought leadership level? We're doing a lot of research at Dell. And of course, we'd love to work with influencers who are experts in these fields. Or are we driving maybe a goal, trying to accomplish a goal in the technology leadership? It's very different. If I work with a subject matter expert like Mark, or if I work with somebody that is an expert in storage, or go 500 feet deep in a storage topic. The value for the expert in a very deep technology topic is much more around access to peers that we can provide in building a community for them. That is in access to our executives and subject matter experts to get pre-briefed on what we are doing, what we're announcing, to get peaks and roadmaps. And then really to have a one-up on what we're doing, and also be able to feedback on that. So depending on your audience that you want to reach, which everything, and Mark brought it to a point, the customer centricity, we are looking at this, and they're different customers. We have different decision makers that we want to inform with the help of our influencers, but that is always top-notch. So I think I've brought like 3 cases sort of where you can see how different it is and how nuanced and at this point I feel sophisticated our approach is compared to the days, Alistair, you evoked in the beginning when it was, a tweet about a product or something like this. So.
Yeah.
I'd like to chime in on that. I'd like to chime in on that too, and mention that or reinforce that part of the benefit, of course, for me working with Dell, and it was really a journey to get to the point where I'm now, hosting a podcast for Dell, is, there is this constant value exchange, and it's kind of sneaky in a way, because so Dell is exposing me to some of their thought leaders and some of their customers, and I'm legitimately just blown away by the people that we're talking to. I'm learning every single time we do an interview. I'm taking value away. I'm sharing these stories with my audience, the things that I'm learning. It's just like, wow, did you know that Dell is doing this? Did you know their customers are doing this? Here's an example of how someone is using IoT and artificial intelligence and big data analytics to grow plants in warehouses without sunlight or soil. So, it's learning these stories. It sort of helps me internalize these values and reflect them back to the world.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Connie, some really good examples there from the B2B world. And I've got some questions about how you go about, choosing to work with influencers. Interesting to hear you talk about the timelines, which may surprise some people. But before I come back to you, Connie, on that, I just want to hear first of all from Tim McLoughlin, just to get a bit of a perspective from the consumer world as well, because obviously getting brand alignment, building long-term partnerships with influencers is just as important in the B2C world as well. So, Tim, can you maybe just share a couple of examples of where a brand influencer collaboration has worked well, and why you think it's worked well in terms of brand alignment?
Absolutely. I think getting the right brand alignment is really, really important, and that comes on a number of levels. It's not just about buying reach. It's not just a media game. And I think that's where a lot of influencer work starts from, and it's not necessarily always correct. We always look at a number of different things that we can get from the partnership. So actually, it's a creative partnership first and foremost. So actually, we're looking at somebody who is making content for us that otherwise we'd have to make ourselves. And likewise, then we're looking for a value partnership as well. So we try to position ourselves as a brand that is fun, is cheeky, is straightforward, and we want to work with people who exude those same values as us. I think that's really, really important. So we start from that value set first, and then we look at the style and we think about creativity and what we can do with that partner. Then we might look at things like reach as well, because that is also important for us if we're paying. So we've run a number of partnerships going back over the last couple of years at sort of different levels. So we sort of have a small, medium, and large sort of basis. So at a small level, one of the things that we find works particularly well is that when we're trying to source content in the travel industry, everyone, if you go to Instagram, there are there is a glut of imagery, of beautiful beaches, of sunsets, and some of them are from brands, some of them from people. Often the best ones are just from individuals. But it's easy working in travel because you can do that, but it's also hard to stand out because it all works the same. So that's where working with a partner can really, really help us. So, for example, in Latin America, every piece of content that we run on our Instagram account has come from a series of small partners. So sometimes we might host events and we'll take them. For example, we ran an event for the Brazilian market where we took a series of journalists and influencers to a park called Ushuaia in Argentina, because most Brazilians tend to go, if they go to Argentina, they go to Buenos Aires, but we wanted to try and encourage travel to the rest of the country. So we sent a bunch there. We found that it was a great way to really build a much more long-lasting partnership, one that we still have working with a lot of those same people today. So there's also a Brazilian couple called Numpulo, and they have a blog, they have YouTube, they do lots of stuff on Instagram, and we've ended up sending them to all sorts of places around the world because they really, really fit our style and our tone, and that really makes our lives a lot easier because there's a level of consistency, there's a level of familiarity. We understand how each of us work, and we know what we're getting, and that really, really helps. And we're also not having to then reinvent the wheel every time because we have a long-term partnership. At the other end of the scale, when we were trying to really sort of force our way out into the world of being one of these more fun brands, we partnered with an 89-year-old Instagram grandma called Baddie Winkle, and she looks like somebody of her age, but somebody who's wearing she's like a high fashionista, and she attends fashion shows and fashion parties. So I recommend looking her up. She's just incredibly
Baddie
fun.
Winkle, is it?
Baddie Winkle, B-A-D-D-I-E.
Baddie Winkle.
Baddie Winkle, Baddie Winkle maybe, but she has over 3 million followers on Instagram. But
Wow.
most of those followers are exactly our target audience, so 25 to 35-year-olds. And so we sent her on a bucket list tour of places that she really wanted to go and visit. We got some amazing content, and it was one of those things that we reached millions of people. I think we were growing like tens of thousands of followers on some of our social platforms, and we also, because it was a PR and social partnership, we gained around 500 pieces of press coverage for the partnership as well, in a lot of different countries around the world. So sometimes that one big partnership, granted it was one of the more expensive ones we did, but it had so much value that really went on and had a very long tail for us. So it was really a really, really great one for us. Likewise, at the other end of the scale, we do a lot of smaller versions as well. So it's a really, really important part of our business, and particularly in our social department, where we don't have an agency. So we're often looking for influencers to be our content creators and to be that agency for us. And the way that we do that is we vet them like we would an agency, and we brief them in the same way that we would an agency to get the kind of work out of it that we're happy with.
Yeah, cool. Really good contrast there to the examples from Connie, so hopefully if it's something for everyone listening. And Connie, I just want to come back actually on something that you were talking about, and I've also now got some questions from what Tim said as well. But Connie, the partnerships you described are ones that you built up over a period of time, and there's various things you've done with those influencers during that time. But what kind of advice would you give for someone who doesn't really have influencers already working with, and they're trying to figure out who to work with? What tips do you have for actually how to use brand values as part of the kind of selection process? And what does that mean in practice when you're actually looking at a potential influencer to partner? How did you, in the early stages, decide this influencer or not that influencer, or was it very much kind of trial and error through doing projects with them?
Great question. I also want to comment on Tim's example with Baddie Winkle. It's fantastic. I love it, and you can see the mutual value creation. So very, very fun example. Well, so in answering your question, Alistair, I want to just briefly deviate to what our rules of engagement are and what we're trying to accomplish, just really briefly, and the benefits, just kind of bringing everybody back to why we're doing this. There are benefits, of course, of working with influencers, such as third-party credibility, such as access to new audiences, getting customer insights. Mark talked to that just a little bit. Of course, a pipeline of content, brand awareness and consideration. So just to scratch the surface, and of course increase in share of voice. So let's not forget that this is more than the beautiful friendships that develop over it. Coming back to the business values, there are certain rules of engagement before and then I will get to your question. This has to be of mutual benefit. I think that's been clear now in this conversation that we have, and has openness and honesty are of really paramount importance as well. Otherwise, it's not going to work. This is not a money for content exchange that we could hire ourselves. The relevance for both parties in what we're doing is important. And of course, the outcomes are really, really important. And that becomes a much more important topic as we go along. So, and that's a segue now into me actually answering your question about how we go about choosing influencers. So it is very complex, because while in the beginning of our influencer program many years ago, it really at Dell goes back to the days when we got into social media, and it grew out of those kinds of efforts when social media influencers sort of came to the surface because they had established relationships with audiences based on their social presence and then their expertise, but also on their knowledge of social media. So we have now moved far away from that, not away from those influencers, but away on how sophisticated we are. So that said, our selection process of influencers has become ever so much more sophisticated as well. So of course, we are starting with the business goal. And I mentioned like the high-level purpose, never forgetting that, but now going in and looking at specific goals that we have. For example, we want to specifically develop share of voice in the marketplace on storage, right? So now I have that goal, and now I have to find an expert with the right expertise, but also who matches up with us, with our company. We are a large global company, so that already sets the parameters on we are looking with people who can, want to, and are comfortable with working with large global companies. And then we set a profile, and that's very, very important. And this we do not in a vacuum, but we do that together with the business units, with the storage experts, with people from PR, with the messaging team. So a lot of people share in, really inputting how can we best build this profile. And then we work with companies, with a company to build a search query that can help us surface those influencers. And I'm kind of going through the process really fast. There's a lot of work behind this, so it's never an easy process. It's never an ending process. These profiles that we create for very specific influencers are evolving as fast as, in our case, the technology and the terminology used in the technology is evolving. So the sophistication has to be built in from the goal setting stage through the profile building stage. And then we get a list of influencers, potential influencers that we can work with. So now another round of work starts together with the company who does the analytics for us, with our own subject matter experts, and other influencers even, to make sure that we put human intelligence on the algorithm. And that again also is an ongoing process that's never fast. Always driving back to what do we actually want to accomplish, and who is the audience that we're trying to talk to. So of course we need to find experts with influence that talk the language of our target audience. And oftentimes, almost always, this process that I've just described is step one. Step two now is to then plan for a first engagement. And only then and over time will we really see, is this a person we can work with long term? Can we build a trusted relationship with them? Do they have the right expertise? And that will never become 100% clear until we work with them. And from there, the relationship evolves. But the main point I'm trying to make here is it's not a fast, quick process of looking at a list or, companies coming to your business and saying, hey, I have 1.5 million influencers in my database. I can rent, quote unquote, some out to you. No, it is a very deliberate, business-driven process that we collaborate with a lot of people to make happen. So I hope that scratches the surface of what you're trying to get at, Alistair.
That's really helpful. I'm curious to know, Tim, is there any similarities in what Connie's described to how you go about doing things at hotels.com?
We do find that I suppose the search and selection and also the measurement, like all of it has to be really rigorous. So like I think I mentioned previously, which I think is similar, like we have influencers are an integral part of what we do at all levels, as I mentioned, from sort of very small to very large. And we treat it just like we would working with any other partner. So we do our due diligence, we do our checks in terms of searching, looking into whether they're the right values for us, but also then, do they reach the right kind of people? But then we also, like I think I was saying, we also look into how we're briefing people and making sure that they understand what it is that we want for a partnership, but we also make sure we give them creative freedom to do things authentically in a way that is going to be suitable for their audience and consistent with what they normally do. I suppose at the other end of the project as well, it's also really important that we get the right kind of metrics from what we're doing as well, so that we can compare this activity against anything else. So we have a tracker, so we compare all of the activity that we've done, whether it's paid, whether it's unpaid, what kind of outputs we got people to do, whether we then also looking at the metrics as well. So one of the things that we do find it can sometimes be a bit of a differentiator between people we do work with and don't work with, is that sometimes we prefer, if it's say Instagram or Facebook, that somebody will do a paid partnership with hotels.com, so that actually people can see that it's a paid ad, so that we know that we're being legal and transparent with everybody. That also means that we get access to their host analytics as well, so that we can see how many people reached, who watched the video, or whatever else was related to that as well. And that's a really, really important aspect to us. And but it is exactly the same as how we would set up if we were working with another brand, or in our business, if we were working with a hotel, we do exactly the same thing. And we're about to go and film something for the UK market at a hotel next week. And we'll do exactly the same thing with that hotel as we would with an influencer. So we'd ask them to set this up in a partnership post, for example. We would share our data with them, and we would expect them to share it back with us as well.
Cool, thanks. It's good to get both perspectives. One thing I mentioned at the start was about influencer marketing actually being a very broad term that can mean all sorts of different things. And one nice trend that we're seeing more and more of is companies really thinking about some of their own people as influencers and experts, and trying to look at how to build up their own network and connecting them with influencers. Mark, you've actually written a book pretty much on that topic, your book Known, talking about personal brand building in a digital age. And to think about influencer marketing and building an advocacy program, I mean, how important is it for brands to think about some of their own people and how they can help build their own, the brand of some of their own thought leaders, some of their own spokespeople, their senior execs, subject matter experts, whatever it is, in this influencer mix? And how can they go about thinking about influencers that could be good to help build some of the networks of their own people?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the traditional ways we've been marketing just aren't working anymore. People aren't seeing ads like they used to. I mean, I watch more television than I've ever watched in my life, but I never see ads because it's almost all coming through Netflix or Amazon or something like that. I listen to radio in my car hours and hours a week, but I never hear ads because I'm listening to Sirius XM or a podcast or an audiobook or something like that. And so, the attention to traditional marketing and advertising is not what it used to be, and the trust isn't what it used to be. We see that trust in brands, companies, and advertising has declined 10 years in a row, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. So people trust people. I was talking with a young guy this week down in Atlanta. He's a young entrepreneur down there, and I said, "Who are the brands that you trust?" He had to think for a minute, and he said Tesla. I said, "Why Tesla?" He said, "Because of Elon Musk. Elon Musk, I just trust that guy. I don't care what he sells. I want to put his solar panels on my house. I want to, support SpaceX just because I believe in him as a personality." Another person he mentioned is James Dyson, an entrepreneur and the inventor of, the vacuums that are so innovative. Why? Because he believes in him as a person. And what we're seeing is that people are creating that emotional attention to people more than the products, even the products and the services. I was in a conversation with a young person in my community here who was buying a certain local brand of soap for her house. She's paying 10 times more for that soap than something created by Unilever or Procter & Gamble. I said, "Why are you buying this soap?" She said, "Well, it's not that I really like the brand. I like the hands that made it." And then she went on to tell me the story of the people behind this brand. So I think this is a very important concept. It's an underestimated, ignored concept, really. And it's beyond just employee advocacy. I'm really sort of against employee advocacy as it's described by, getting people to share our content.
Yeah, it's employee amplification, isn't it? It's not advocacy.
Yeah, I don't think that's authentic, and I don't think that's sustainable. And I think we have to look at today having an effective social media presence is a life skill. If more of our employees had that life skill and we trusted them, wouldn't we win? Wouldn't they salt stories of their life at work into their conversations because it is part of their life? And what if we encourage that? What if we taught them how to do a better job and even amplify that? So I think there is a very, very important place in this. Historically, our businesses and brands have been built through an accumulation of advertising impressions. I believe going forward, our businesses and brands will be built through an accumulation of human impressions. And this idea of considering our own resources, our own employees, and especially our executives, as the leaders who are out there representing our stories and our brand, that has to be an important part of the equation.
Yeah, and how do you say, in terms of the influencer equation, that because some influencers, what they bring is creative skills. Sometimes it's subject matter expertise. They can write a blog, and sometimes what the influencer does is they've actually got a good network. And sometimes it's actually about getting your exec connected into that network through the influencer. And how have you seen that work out?
Well, I mean, everybody is influential in some way. Everybody is influential to some community. And as Connie said earlier, you have to look at your goals. I'm working with one company right now, a big company in Silicon Valley, and their goal is to get more qualified employees. They just can't get enough people to work at their company, and they're having trouble competing with sexy companies like Facebook and Google and Apple, and they're cool and they're innovative, and there's no way they can advertise their way to glory. No way. They have to depend on their employees to tell the stories, and the networks of the employees, and then the audience of the audience. And so that's really an example of letting everybody participate. And you can't force people to do it. I mean, some people just, research shows about 10% of the population are super sharers. They organize their lives to share stories. They love talking about things that are cool and new and things that they've discovered, either outside their company or inside the company. And if you give people that opportunity and you give them the stories and you reward them and nurture them and encourage them. This company that I'm working with, they've paid for employees to create their own little personal branding websites. No strings attached, because they want those stories to spread. And I think that's a very enlightened view of how we need to tell the stories of our companies going forward.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. I'm going to come back to something that, unless anyone else wants to chip in on that, don't I?
Yeah, I
okay,
would love
go ahead,
to, Alistair.
Yeah,
absolutely. So brand advocates is what we call our own influencers internally at Dell Technologies. And you absolutely have to put a great effort into enabling this great potential that I think we have made great progress and are not finished and are never going to be finished with. And the first part starts with education. You know, when social media came out on the scene 10 years ago, we immediately drove a big push to educate folks internally on how to establish your own brand, but also being an employee of a brand. Now, we are in a much later phase now. We have accomplished many goals in terms of education and really outlining governance and also establishing trust, which was a really big factor. 10 years ago, it was very different between the employee and the leaders of a company. You know, they had to give up a lot of reign and trust their own employees. That was a very primary goal for us. And now I see this as much more in terms, if we look at influencer relations, now enabling moments, enabling experiences where the brand advocates from the company, the employees, subject matter experts with influence, we have certainly a lot of them, can meet up with the third-party influencers that we are working with. So that goes back to what I said initially about the community building, the access to peers, because they are peers, subject matter experts in, let's say, I'm going back to the storage example, they are peers. And then, of course, building the community between the influencer peers, our own brand advocate peers, and the executives as well, so they get really also keep a tab on what the vernacular is in the community at any given time, how people talk about certain things. So that's it's incredibly important. And if you leave that out from your strategy as a brand, large or small, you're missing out on a huge opportunity.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. Just before I just want to bring Tim in on this as well, but we've had a couple of questions via the Q&A panel. So if you do have any questions, feel free just to put them in there, and hopefully we'll get some time to answer those before the end of the hour. But Tim, I'm wondering how important a brand advocate, Captain Obvious, is for you guys. But more seriously, in terms of actually picking influencers for you guys at Hotels.com, how important is it in terms of the fit, in terms of like the personality or the sense of humor of the influencer and other characteristics that you have as a brand? You talked a bit about it with Batty Winkle and others, but how does that actual characteristic personality fit factor into the equation when you're deciding who to work with, and at what point do you actually get to know the influencer well enough to see whether they've got that kind of personality fit with you as a brand?
It is incredibly important. It's one of the toughest criteria to judge, I think. We can get an understanding from looking at their previous content, but I would also say is that when we're briefing and when we're talking to that influencer, we also get a good idea of what it's like to work with them. And so we have had plenty of examples of pretty high-profile influencers that potentially would have got us millions in views or reach or whatever, that we've walked away from because we didn't feel that the actual fit was right, or that the way that they wanted to work felt authentic for us. And so it's a really, really important thing. We almost see it, it's a little bit like a job interview. People tend to buy people, and they I liked what I was hearing earlier from both Mark and Connie as well, because humanity and people is a really, really key aspect. So one of our main objectives here is to humanize our brand and actually really give it a real human face. We also use our employees. Think about the earlier point. So on our main Instagram account, almost everything we see there is from our employees. So we use it as an employee engagement program primarily, but also to showcase the kind of brand that we are and the personality we've got and the people that work here. And we look for exactly the same when we work with external influencers. So we worked with Paper Boyo, who makes some really beautiful, uses paper cutouts, sort of plays around with perspective. And we sent him to Barcelona earlier in the year because we were trying to sort of promote that as a destination. He made some beautiful stuff, but when we first started talking to him, we felt like he was somebody we could work with. And when I was talking on the previous point about what the process that we go through when we're asking about, making sure that they can share metrics with us, and when we ask for things like reach, not impressions, and we don't want their follower numbers, we want actual reach, and we want to know where they are and what age they are. The best influencers and the ones that we tend to work very well with have no problem with that at all, and are very open and easy about sharing that kind of thing with us, because they know it's important to us, and they know that then by doing that they'll get paid. Whereas sometimes we find people get a little bit shifty about it, or don't really want to share, or have a bit of a problem with that, or have a bit of a problem working with a brief, and then we think, well, actually, no, you're not the kind of person that we want to work with, because having that serious business side is really important, but also if we know that we're okay with that side of things, and we know that we found somebody that we think, on camera has the kind of personality that we like, then we're happy. But we do look for both sides. We look for a business head as well as a creative head, and both are just as important for us, and we couldn't work with somebody if they only had one and not the other.
Okay. Thank you. So I've got a few minutes left. I just want to pick up on a question we've had from the audience. In your experience, is it better to work with a large number of micro-influencers or a smaller number of more authoritative influencers? Who wants to pick that one up first?
I'll be happy to, because it's a great question. It really is a question that became a question over time, of course. And again, it goes back to brands discovering quote unquote influencers. And of course, the initial draw was to the mega influencers that are mega connected, that have a large voice on social media. Now, what has happened in becoming more sophisticated, becoming more developed and evolved as an influencer program, we are certainly realizing we reach very, very different audiences with the mega influencer and the micro influencer. Now the question is, what's better, to have more micro versus a few mega influencers? You need both. You absolutely need both. So for different topics. So I talked about thought leadership. I talked about those kind of influencers that help us share our corporate story, even our CSR story, how well are we in this world doing as a social good. You need a mega influencer because your audience is worldwide at that point, and you have to have a language and somebody who's recognized as somebody who can, who already has this influence. Now, I'm working in an IT and technology company, so the micro influencers, and I bring back my technology and storage example. I need the micro influencer, and I need not a large number, but I need the 1% among these micro influencers in storage to be tied out with my brand, because now they're talking to the IT decision makers, to the CIOs. They have their ears, and I need those as well. So to answer the question, you absolutely, in a B2B environment, you need both. That maybe is slightly different for Tim, not exactly sure, but so I can, that's how I would answer the question.
Thanks. Guys, you want to chip in? Mark or Tim?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Well, I just really agree with Connie. I mean, it all gets back to your goal and what you want to achieve. So really, nothing more to add.
Tim, you were going to say as well?
Yeah, I'd just say it's exactly the same for us on the consumer side. I think I mentioned earlier that we use influence for different purposes, so it depends on our objectives and our budget. We tend to have a mix of, we probably have think of a pyramid. We might work with one or two very big ones in a year around the world, and we'll work with lots of smaller ones on smaller projects. So if we just want somebody to create some Instagram content so that we have some good compelling content that humanises our brand, then we'll work with lots of smaller people that fit our style. But if we want to go for that big bang of publicity, then we'll devise almost like a big consumer ad campaign with an influencer at the centre of it. So yeah, it really depends what you want to do.
Cool. Thanks all. I think we've got time for one more question. I've got a question here which actually starts for Connie. So we'll let Connie start off answering this one. But this is, I think what you said must have struck a chord. It says, I've tried to get internal experts to interact with influencers, but it's so hard. Many almost seem scared to talk to influencers, even when they probably know more about the topic than the influencer. Any tips to encourage the peer interaction that you talked about?
Yes, I love that question because it really is, it is not an easy thing to do. We have began to solve this by creating an experience at an event. So if you have the opportunity, and this is really going to the point that influencers, while they social used to be the primary leg, it's not for us anymore. It's one leg to stand on. So for this particular one, there are many ways to do this on social, but the best one I have found is when you have an event, and we have one of those big ones once a year, take the opportunity to create an experience for the influencer and the subject matter expert internally to meet in a less than formal environment. So this is not your formal staffed PR interview or something like this. This is having a space with tables and coffee and cookies to have them talk to each other about a topic. You give a topic because that makes it easier to connect, and I'm going to stick with my storage topic here. So you have a storage influencer that is viewed by many, and we have one of those, as very antagonistic but very valuable because he has the ear of his audience, those important IT decision makers that we would love to have on board. And you have a subject matter expert, a brand advocate from your own company, and you put them together, and there's this personal connection is being built. We have done this successfully now one time at a larger scale, and we're definitely going to continue with that because this person-to-person will then enable the online exchanges, make them more fruitful, take away this fear. I haven't seen so much the fear. It's because our influencers are, everybody has great subject matter expertise, so they are peers. They just have to discover each other on a personal and human level. And I think that's kind of where I want to end it.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with Connie that the key to success is cookies.
Real ones? Everyone's in the browser.
Chocolate chip cookies, real cookies, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she said, yeah. Okay. I was trying to be funny, but it fell flat.
I'm totally, I take payment in cookies, just if anyone's listening.
Yeah, I do too.
Great. Hey, well, our time's actually gone by really fast. With loads of really useful stuff there. I hope people listening have found it informative and helpful. I just want to thank all three of you. So thank you, Connie, Tim, and Mark, for all your insights and answering the questions. And I hope everyone is going to take some of this and really get involved in putting together some really, really effective influencer programs. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.